My daughter bought her mother-in-law a brand new kitchen, marble countertops, custom cabinets, a refrigerator that cost more than my first car. $62,000. $62,000. I know the number because she told me about it herself, proud as a peacock, showing me the photos on her phone while I sat across from her at her dining room table. That same afternoon, I asked her to help me cover my blood pressure prescription. $23. She looked at me like I'd asked her to wire money overseas. Dad, we're just really stretched right now. That was the moment I understood that I had raised a stranger. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start with the kitchen or the pills. It starts about 40 years ago, in a small house in eastern Kentucky, where I worked 6 days a week at a textile mill and came home every night smelling like dye and machine oil. My name is Raymond Calloway. I'm 64 years old, retired, and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Knoxville, Tennessee. My monthly income from Social Security and a small pension from the mill comes to just under $1,900. After rent, utilities, and groceries, I have about $220 left each month. That's what I have to work with. That's my life. That's my life. I raised 2 children. My son Marcus is a good man. He lives in Chattanooga, works at a shipping company, calls me every Sunday without fail, and has offered to help me more times than I can count. I always tell him no. I don't want to be a burden to him. He has 3 kids of his own and a mortgage that's not small. My daughter is Renee. She is 37 years old and lives about 20 minutes from me. She married a man named Glenn about 5 years ago. Glenn comes from money. His family owns 3 car dealerships across Tennessee and a farm in Blount County that's been in their family for 4 generations. They live in a house with a wraparound porch, a pool in the backyard, and a garage with 3 vehicles in it. Renee works as an interior designer, which explains the kitchen, I suppose. She has the eye for the expensive version of everything. I raised Renee by myself from the time she was 11. Her mother, Diane, passed away from ovarian cancer in the spring of 1999. I was 40 years old with 2 kids, a job I couldn't afford to lose, and a grief I didn't have time to process. I processed it by working. I worked extra shifts. I picked up weekends. I began. I drove 40 minutes each way to that mill for 22 more years after Diane died, and I never once asked my kids to go without. Renee had dance lessons. She had school trips, and she had a used car on her 16th birthday, nothing fancy, a 2001 Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it, but it ran and it was hers. When she got accepted to the University of Tennessee, I cried in the parking lot of the Dollar General because I was so proud and so scared I couldn't afford to send her. But I figured it out. I took out a small loan. I picked up a second job on weekends doing maintenance at an apartment complex. I never told her how close we were to the edge. I didn't want her to carry that weight. I wanted her to just go and be brilliant, and she was. The distance started small, the way these things always do. After she married Glenn, the Sunday dinners became monthly. Then they became holiday only. She stopped calling, just to talk. And when she did call, she was always somewhere driving to a client, running errands, heading to yoga. The conversations got shorter. She stopped asking about my health. She stopped asking about my friends from the mill, the guys I used to fish with on Saturdays, the ones who knew me before I became Renee's dad and Glenn's father-in-law. I became background noise, a checkbox, call dad, done, move on. Glenn's mother, Patricia, was another story. She was a sharp woman, 70 years old, well-dressed, sharp-tongued, and absolutely certain that she was the center of every room she walked into. She was polite to me at family dinners in the way that expensive hotels are polite to guests who book the cheapest room. She'd ask me about the mill with that particular smile that people use when they already think they know the answer and they just want to confirm it. I saw the way she looked at my shoes. I saw the way she glanced at my truck, a 2009 Ford Ranger with a dent above the rear wheel that I kept meaning to get fixed. I didn't belong in their world, and Patricia made sure I felt it. Gently, never rudely, just consistently. I told myself I was overthinking it, I told myself Renee was just busy. I told myself this was what happened when your kids grew up and built their own lives and that I should be grateful she'd built a good one. I was grateful. I was just also lonely in a way I didn't have a word for. About 8 months ago, my doctor told me my blood pressure had been running high for too long. Not dangerously high, but high enough that we couldn't ignore it anymore. He prescribed me a medication I needed to take every morning. It was a standard drug, nothing exotic, and with my insurance it cost $23 a month. Not every month was tight. Most months I managed. But last October was rough. My truck needed a new alternator. The repair was $240 and I didn't have a choice because I need that truck to get to my doctor's appointments and the grocery store. By the time I paid the mechanic, I had $51 left to last me until the 15th. My prescription was due. I sat with that for a few days. I'm not a man who asks for help easily. I grew up in a house where you figured things out, or you did without it. I have asked my children for money exactly once in my adult life. When Marcus was about 12 and Renee was 9 and the furnace died in January and I needed $40 for a part. I paid Marcus back in ice cream cones and Renee back in extra book fare money. That was 25 years ago, so when I picked up the phone to call Renee, my hands were not entirely steady. She answered on the third ring. She sounded distracted. I could hear what I thought was a podcast or maybe a design presentation playing in the background. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "What?" I asked about Glenn, about how things were going. She gave me the short version of fine. Then I said it. I told her about the truck repair, told her about the timing, told her I just needed a small bridge loan until my check came in on the 15th. $23 for my blood pressure medication. I'd pay her back in a week. There was a silence. Not a long one, but it had a texture to it that I recognized. It was the silence of someone trying to figure out how to say no without saying no. "Dad, I honestly wish I could, but we just signed off on this renovation project for Patricia's kitchen and the deposit wiped out our cushion. We're being really careful about extras right now." "Extras?" "My prescription was an extra." I said. I understood. I told her not to worry about it. I got off the phone and I sat in my recliner and I stared at the wall for a long time. I rationed the pills. "I know you're not supposed to do that." My doctor had been clear about consistency, but I took one every other day and told myself it was fine, told myself I'd make it to the 15th, told myself this was just a rough patch. 3 days later, Renee posted photos on Instagram. I don't use Instagram much, but Marcus texted me a screenshot because he thought I'd want to see the renovation. Patricia's new kitchen. White marble countertops that ran the full length of the room. Custom hand-painted cabinetry in a shade of sage green that Renee had apparently sourced from a supplier in Charlotte. A refrigerator with a built-in screen. A gas range with 8 burners. The caption read, "So honored to design this space for the most gracious woman. Glenn's mom deserves every inch of this. Family is everything." $62,000. Glenn's dealerships had covered it, yes, but Renee had designed it herself, had managed the whole project as a gift, had donated her fee, had spent months making it perfect. For a woman who had never once asked me about my name before my occupation, I put my phone down on the kitchen table and I didn't move for a while. I'm not a man who cries easily. Diane's funeral was the last time I cried. And even then, I waited until I was alone in the car. I loved her, but sitting there in my kitchen, looking at a photo of a $62,000 refrigerator on a screen belonging to a woman whose name my daughter had never once mentioned to me until she was already engaged to her son, I felt something that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't just hurt. It was a kind of clarity that is almost worse than hurt. I saw the math of my daughter's love laid out in plain numbers, and it didn't add up to $23. I didn't call her. I didn't say anything. I went to the pharmacy and I explained my situation to the pharmacist, a young woman named Denise who knew me by name because I'd been coming to that same Walgreens for 6 years. She pulled up my account, looked at it, and without making me ask directly, she said, "Mr. Calloway, let me check something." She spent 10 minutes on the phone with the manufacturer's assistance program and got me enrolled on the spot. It took about 20 minutes total. My medication has been free every month since then. I want you to know that, if you're in the same situation, Ask your pharmacist about the patient assistance program before you ever cut a pill in half. Denise helped me more in 20 minutes than my daughter had in 6 months. 2 weeks after the kitchen photos. On a Tuesday morning, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marcus had mentioned he might drive up that weekend, but this was a Tuesday and it was barely 9 o'clock. I looked through the peephole and I genuinely did not recognize the person standing on my landing for a moment. Then I did. It was Glenn, not Renee. Glenn, alone, in a jacket, holding what looked like a folder of some kind. I opened the door. He looked uncomfortable. Not unfriendly, but uncomfortable in the way that a man looks when he has decided to do something difficult and is now standing in the actual moment of it. "Ray," he said, "I know I'm showing up without warning. I was hoping you'd have a few minutes." I stepped back and let him in. My apartment is small and clean. I don't have much, but I keep what I have in order. Glenn sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd gotten off the phone with Renee 8 months earlier, and he set the folder down in front of him but didn't open it yet. He said, "I owe you an apology. And I think I owe you an explanation." I said I was listening. He told me that he'd found out about the phone call. Not from Renee. He'd found out because of an argument they'd had a month after it happened, an argument about money, and in the middle of it Renee had said, almost in passing, "I can't even help my own father with a $20 prescription, Glenn. We need to get our finances under control." He hadn't known until that moment. He said he'd asked her about it, and she'd minimized it, said I was fine, said it was temporary, said I'd figured it out. He hadn't pushed it then, but it had stayed with him. Then he told me the second thing. He opened the folder. His parents, Patricia and his father Donald, had been quietly helping Glenn and Renee cover parts of their mortgage for over a year. The dealership income had dropped significantly after Glenn's brother had left the business, and the household budget was nowhere near as solid as it looked from the outside. That kitchen renovation had been financed partly by Donald pulling from a home equity line. The Instagram caption about family is everything had been posted from inside a kitchen built on credit that Glenn was still figuring out how to repay. "We are not rich, Ray," Glenn said, and he looked tired when he said it. "We look like we are, but we're not." And I let Renee keep up the appearance because I didn't know how to tell her it wasn't real. But there was more. He turned to another page in the folder. His mother Patricia had said something to him the previous week that had finally broken something open. She had told him that if his finances were tighter, it was partly because Glenn had married a woman who came from nothing and brought nothing into the marriage. She had said it at Sunday dinner with Renee sitting right there. Glenn had confronted her about it afterward, and Patricia, in her defense, had said, "I just mean she doesn't have family resources. Her father's on a fixed income. There's no estate there." Glenn looked at me across the table and said, "I went back and looked at everything. What you did, what you actually gave Renee over the years, the tuition loan you co-signed, the car, the, 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 the moving costs when she came to Knoxville after college, the furniture you helped her buy for her first apartment. Ray, you gave her everything you had. And my mother is in a $62,000 kitchen, calling you nothing." I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the folder. I looked at Glenn's face. This was not a man I had ever particularly connected with. He was polite at holidays, pleasant but distant, the kind of son-in-law who remembers your birthday because it's in his phone. I had never disliked him. I had just never known him. And now here he was at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning telling me the truth that my own daughter hadn't. "What is it you're hoping will happen?" I asked him. He said he wanted me to know that he was going to have a real conversation with Renee. Not an argument, not an accusation, a conversation. A conversation. He wanted her to understand what she had done, what she was doing, what she was at risk of losing. He said, "I don't want my kids growing up not knowing their grandfather. You're the only one Renee has left." He paused. Then he said, "And I don't want Renee to wake up in 20 years and realize she became someone she wouldn't recognize." Then he pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. I didn't open it. I told him I didn't want his money. He shook his head. "It's not money," said. "Open it." I opened it. Inside was a card, and behind the card was a printed certificate from a program called KinCare, a local nonprofit that helps seniors with prescription costs. transportation to appointments, grocery assistance, home repair. He had registered me. He had already paid the annual contribution. He had listed himself as my emergency contact. "This isn't charity," he said. "I know you won't accept that. This is me making up for lost time, and it's the least I can do." I sat there for a long moment. Then I put the card back in the envelope and I said, "You're a better man than I gave you credit for." He nodded and looked like he was trying to decide whether to say something else. Then he said, "My mother is going to be furious that I came here." I said, "I imagine so." He said, "I don't particularly care." He left about 20 minutes later. That afternoon, Renee called me. I knew Glenn had talked to her. I didn't know what he'd said exactly, but I could hear it in her voice before she said a word. She sounded scraped out, like someone who had just seen something about themselves in a mirror they'd been avoiding. She said, "Dad, I need to come see you." I said, "I'll put the coffee on." She came over that evening. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table and she didn't make excuses right away, which surprised me. She said, "I've been trying to figure out how to explain this to you and I don't think I can explain it in a way that makes it okay. So, I'm just going to tell you what happened." She told me that over the past 2 years she had been quietly telling Glenn's family a version of things that wasn't true. Not dramatic lies, she said, just a shading. She had implied that I had some savings set aside, that I was more comfortable than I appeared, that my situation wasn't as tight as it might look. She had done it because she was embarrassed. She had done it because Patricia had looked at her with exactly the same expression Patricia used to give me, and Renee had wanted to be seen as coming from somewhere, not from nothing. She had wanted to be Glenn's equal in their world, and she had traded my dignity for a little bit of social standing. She was crying by the time she got to the end of it. I let her finish. Then I said, "Renee, do you remember what I told you the day you left for Knoxville? When you'd loaded up your car and you were about to drive off?" She thought for a moment. "And," she said, "you told me that wherever I went, I came from somewhere, and I should never be ashamed of where." She started crying harder. I handed her a paper towel because I didn't have any tissues. I told her I wasn't going to pretend it didn't hurt. I told her the truth, that sitting alone in this apartment, rationing my blood pressure medication and looking at photos of a kitchen I couldn't have afforded in 3 lifetimes, had been one of the loneliest moments of my life. I told her that. I didn't soften it. She needed to hear the real number, not a rounded-down version. But I also told her that I didn't think she was a bad person. I told her I thought she was a scared person who had made a coward's choice, and that those were very different things, and that the difference was whether she was willing to change it. She asked me what I needed from her. I said I needed her to stop managing my image with people who didn't matter and start being my daughter again. I said I wanted to come to Sunday dinners sometimes. And again, I said I wanted to hear about her work. I said I wanted to know my grandchildren when they came along, and I said that if she ever heard Patricia or anyone else refer to me as nothing, I wanted her to correct them. Out loud. In the room. I said. She nodded. She said she would. I told her I was going to hold her to it. Now, Patricia, I won't spend long on this because I think you can imagine it. Glenn sat down with his parents the following week, and he told them what he told me, the full picture, the finances, the mortgage help, the equity line, the kitchen, all of it in context. And he told his mother, gently but without ambiguity, that her comment about Renee bringing nothing into the marriage was not something he was going to tolerate again. He told her that Ray Calloway had worked his hands raw for 4 decades to give his daughter every opportunity she had, and that if Patricia wanted to continue having the relationship with Glenn and Renee that she valued, she was going to need to adjust her understanding of what family resources actually meant. I was not there for that conversation. Glenn told me about it afterward over coffee at a diner near my apartment. He said his mother had been very quiet during most of it. He said at the end she had said, "I may have misjudged some things." For Patricia, I was told, that was about as close to an apology as it got. A few weeks later, she called me. She was stiff, formal, still a little too polished, but she called. She asked how I was doing. She mentioned that the kitchen had turned out beautifully and that Renee had extraordinary talent. I said Renee had gotten that from her mother, who used to rearrange our furniture every season just to keep things feeling fresh. Patricia laughed. It was a small laugh, but it was real. 3. I don't think Patricia and I will ever be close, but I think she looked at the full picture and found it harder to dismiss than she expected. Things are different now. Not perfect, not wrapped up with a ribbon, but different. Renee comes over on the first Sunday of every month. She brings lunch. We eat at this same kitchen table and she tells me about her projects, and I tell her about the book I'm reading or the fishing trip Marcus and I are planning for the spring. Last month she brought Glenn, and the three of us watched a football game together. It was easy in a way I hadn't expected. Glenn and I, it turns out, both think the Titans have been mismanaged for a decade. We have opinions about this. Strong ones. Titan says, my prescription is still free through the program Glenn registered me for. And my truck still has the dent above the rear wheel. I'm getting around to fixing it. Marcus and I are going to East Tennessee in April to fish the Clinch River, which is something we talked about doing for probably 15 years and kept not doing, and now we are going to do it. These are the real numbers of my life, not the ones that look impressive from the outside. The real ones. About 3 months after that Tuesday morning when Glenn showed up at my door, I was sitting on my small balcony in the evening, drinking coffee and watching the parking lot the way you do when you're older and you've stopped needing your evenings to be exciting. My phone rang. It was Renee. She didn't have a reason. She just called. She said, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" I said I was sitting outside. She said, "How's the coffee?" I said it was terrible, same as always. She laughed. Then we just talked. About nothing. About the weather in Knoxville and a podcast she'd been listening to and a funny thing that happened at a client meeting. We talked for 45 minutes. When she hung up, she said, "Love you, Dad." Said it back. And the parking lot looked exactly the same as it had before the call. But I was not the same man sitting in it. I want to say one thing to anybody out there who is where I was 8 months ago. If you are a parent who is given everything and you are sitting alone wondering how you became an afterthought, I want you to hear this. You are not nothing, and you are not a burden, and you are not an inconvenient reminder of where your kids came from. You are the foundation they built on, and if they have forgotten that, it is not because they don't know better. It's because they got scared. Fear makes people selfish, and love, real love, brings them back. Sometimes they need time. Sometimes they need someone else to hold the mirror. And sometimes you have to close the door and let them knock on their own. My daughter didn't buy me a kitchen. She didn't write me a check. She didn't put me in a house with marble countertops and an 8-burner range. What she did was show up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening with a paper bag of sandwiches from the deli I like, sit down at my kitchen table, and tell me the truth about who she had been and who she wanted to be. That was the gift. That is the only one that mattered. Because marble is just stone. But a daughter who looks her father in the eye and says, "I'm sorry, I forgot where I came from," that's worth more than any kitchen ever built. If any of you have been through something like this with your own kids, I want to hear from you. Tell me below. Tell me what happened, tell me how it turned out, or tell me that you're still in the middle of it and haven't gotten to the other side yet. I'll read every one. Because nobody should have to sit alone in a quiet apartment wondering if the love they gave was real. It was real. It always was. And